Charlie Baker 0405119 U-100 Interrogation of Survivors April 1941 Naval Intelligence Division Admiralty SW-1 N.I.D. The following report is compiled from information derived from prisoners of war. The statements made cannot always be verified. They should therefore not be accepted as facts unless they are definitely stated to be confirmed by information from other sources. Table of Contents 1. Introductory Remarks 2. Crew of U-100 3. Early History of U-100 4. Earlier Cruises of U-100 5. Sixth and Last Cruise of U-100 6. Sinking of U-100 7. Details of U-100 8. Other U-boats and Appendix. List of crew of U-100. Report of interrogation of survivors of U-100. Sunk at about 0320 GMT on Monday, 17th March, 1941. In position approximately 61 degrees 4 north and 11 degrees 30 west. Section 1. Introductory Remarks. As stated in the introductory remarks to the report on the interrogation of survivors of U-70, all matters detailing with U-boats generally are being included in the report on U-99. This report on U-100 contains, therefore, only information obtained regarding the history, activities, and particulars of U-100 and her complement. Included are also some statements regarding U-2 and U-19, which were under the command of Kapitänleutnant Lieutenant Commander Schepke during the early months of the war. This information should be regarded as a correction of statements made in the past by prisoners captured at earlier dates. Section 2. Crew of U-100. The complement of U-100 consisted of 5 officers, 15 petty officers, and 41 ratings, but an additional officer under instruction was carried on the last cruise. This man, Korvettkapten Commander Siegfried Pfister, was the only officer who survived. 3 petty officers and 2 ratings were also rescued. Pfister, now 35 years old, joined the German Navy in 1925. He spent most of his career in small vessels and specialized in mines. In 1938, he was instructor and commanding officer of the Boom Defense School. He was later appointed to the battleship Scharnhorst and took part in the activities of that ship during the Norwegian campaign. He was also in her at the sinking of HMS Glorious and the destroyers Ardent and Acasta. He was promoted to Korvettkapten, commander, in 1940. Towards the end of 1940, Pfister was transferred to the U-boat branch. Although he did not volunteer for this section of the service, he did not object and was quite satisfied with the prospect. He took a shortened course of about 2 to 3 months at Pillau, where there was a sufficiently large number of officers of approximately his seniority to warrant the establishment of a special group undergoing this training. He was on his first cruise under instruction when U-100 was sunk. He was quite a pleasant little man, and being older and remembering a more humanistic existence, he was a less extreme Nazi than the most prisoners hitherto captured, but on the subject of the Führer's infallibility, Pfister was convinced to the point of fanaticism. But he could not offer any explanation for the fact that the infallible Hitler continued to make the mistake of surrounding himself with men whom the better types of German, especially in the services, despised as unscrupulous opportunists and gangsters. Pfister was obviously ashamed of this sinister entourage, and tried to avoid discussion by reverting to naval topics. He professed a profound admiration for the British Navy, and worked himself up into an emotional state when describing the sinking of HMS Ardent and HMS Acasta. Pfister seemed to be, in many cases, a more normal human being, any more typical naval officer than most earlier prisoners, and possessed less of his usual inferiority complex, which has hitherto made many of his captured brother officers so sensitive of their dignity. Pfister is a bachelor and lived in Kiel. The surviving petty officers and ratings of U-100, who had all recently spent some time in Kiel, showed the same sense of security and alertness towards interrogation as did the survivors of U-70, who were also in Germany, for some time shortly before being sunk. Despite their terrible experience of the sinking of U-100, these men showed high morale and the common unshakable confidence in a German decisive victory this year. The three petty officers were well-trained and highly experienced U-boatmen. The officers who did not survive were the captain, Kapitänleutnant, Lieutenant Commander Joachim Schepke, the first lieutenant, Oberleutnant zur See, Lieutenant Mayer, the junior officer, Oberleutnant zur See, Lieutenant Bonning, and the engineer officer, Oberleutnant Engineer Lieutenant Eilers. With the exception of the captain, little is known of these officers. Schepke was one of the three leading U-boat captains of this war, his total sinkings being exceeded only by Kretschmer and Prien. Schepke was born in Flensburg on 8th March 1912 and was brought up in Kiel. He joined the Navy on 1st April 1930. As a naval cadet, he went on a training cruise round the world in the cruiser Emden. After being promoted Lieutenant zur See, sub-lieutenant, in 1934, he transferred to U-boats in 1935. He was promoted Oberleutnant zur See, lieutenant, on 1st June 1936, and in 1937 was an instructor at the torpedo school. In 1938, he commanded a U-boat of the training flotilla, probably U-3, one of the oldest 250-ton U-boats. As at the outbreak of war, he was known to be in command of this boat. His exploits in this U-boat and later in U-19 are included in Section 8 of this report under the headings U-3 and U-19. As the German press has frequently published gruesome accounts of the sinking of British ships and the deaths of British seamen, it seems that such accounts are considered impressive in Germany. The loss of Schepke, the grim manner of his death, and the loss of most of his crew are thought likely to counteract to a considerable extent the propaganda for which he and his men were used. Section 3. Early History of U-100. U-100 was laid down at the Germania Yard, Kiel, before or very soon after the outbreak of war, as she was sufficiently advanced for some members of her crew to be drafted in March 1940 to stand by the U-boat under construction. According to prisoners, she was launched during the second week of April 1940 and probably completed towards the end of May 1940. Kapitänleutnant Lieutenant Commander Schepke arrived to take command of U-100 towards the end of April or early in May 1940. She then carried out preliminary trials in Kiel Bay before proceeding to further trials at Memel and torpedo practice off Gothenhafen. On Thursday, 27th June 1940, just before or in the early stages of a 3-day trial in which U-100 was supposed to proceed in convoy, both her periscopes were damaged, and she put into Danzig dockyard on Sunday, 30th June 1940, for repairs. The special trial was thus missed. Shortly after this, U-100 was damaged while entering a narrow harbor at Memel. She had surfaced and had to turn to starboard. She was moving fast, and the captain had underestimated the strength of the following current. The U-boat was swung against the landing stage, which fouled the port propeller. The port hydroplane and the rudder were smashed, and the port propeller was badly twisted. U-100 was forced to proceed to keel on the starboard engine. On returning to keel in July 1940, U-100 was in the Germania dockyard for 4 weeks and only left on her first cruise towards the middle of August 1940. Section 4. Earlier cruises of U-100. 1. First cruise. U-100 left Kiel on her first cruise on Tuesday, 13th August 1940. Very bad weather was encountered in the North Sea, and most of the crew, of whom many were on their first cruise, were seasick. Soon after reaching the Atlantic, U-100 sighted an apparently new motor vessel proceeding alone and zigzagging. She was described as being about 6,600 tons, with new shining paint and a bright deck, and seemed to be on the way to America. The U-boat fired, submerged, a torpedo from a considerable distance. As the ship did not seem to be sinking fast enough, a second torpedo was fired a little later. Both of these were said to have hit the ship, which then heeled over. U-100 surfaced, and the captain started to climb out of the conning tower, followed by the quartermaster, to have a closer look at their victim. Survivors in one or more lifeboats were mentioned. For some unexplained reason, the U-boat started to submerge, and the captain pushed the quartermaster down the conning tower hatch and slammed it shut, remaining himself on the bridge. The water rose higher and higher, and the captain had to hang on for his life to the periscope. The U-boat then surfaced again, and the crowd were roundly cursed by the soaking wet captain. Another victim of U-100 was described as a ship of 5,500 tons, sailing independently with a cargo of bananas. N.I.D. note, SS Jamaica Pioneer, 5,471 tons, was attacked on this evening of Sunday, 25th August 1940, and positioned 57 degrees 05 north, 11 degrees 02 west. She was hit by 3 torpedoes, shelled and sunk. This ship carried in her cargo a large quantity of bananas. The position in which she was sunk was the area where U-100 would have been operating at that date. A few days later, towards evening, U-100, on coming up to periscope depth after being submerged, sighted a convoy of 15 ships, protected by zigzagging escorting craft. Some prisoners said that U-100 had heard of this convoy from another U-boat, and not as usual from the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats. This statement was not confirmed. There was a light wind and a calm sea with only a slight swell. As soon as it was dark enough, the U-boat fired 2 torpedoes. The Germans claimed that these hit 2 of the largest ships leading their respective columns at the same moment. These ships were said to have been sunk. It is thought that these were the SS Hartesmeer, torpedoed about midnight on 29th August 1940, and SS Dalblair, torpedoed a minute later in position 56 degrees 03 north and 12 degrees 14 west. These vessels were the leading ships of the 3rd and 4th columns respectively in convoy Obo Able 204. Hartesmeer was doing 7.5 knots, zigzagging, when she was hit on the starboard side about 150 feet from the bow. In spite of damage caused, the ship managed to return to port. Dalblair was hit amidships in the starboard side. She broke her back and sank within 10 minutes, with her bow and stern in the air. U-100 wanted to attack other ships in the convoy, but was forced to turn away as escorting craft seemed to be making for her. After making further calculations, an attack was about to be made on a steamer estimated at 3,000 tons. Just as U-100 was about to fire her torpedo, the ship turned towards and came straight at the U-boat. By a quick maneuver, the U-boat managed to slip past the bows of the steamer and then lay stopped. The stern torpedo was then said to have been fired and to have hit the steamer forward. Her crew took to the boats, and she went down by the bows. The stern protected from the sea for a short while, and then disappeared. This ship was thought to have been SS Astra II, 2,393 tons, hit in the forward port at 60 feet from the bow by a torpedo approaching from the starboard side, and she subsequently sank. U-100 then made 2 more attacks, but the torpedoes missed. U-100 would have had to reload her tubes after this last attack, and according to prisoners, she did reload at this juncture, but it was claimed that the next torpedo, fired at close range, hit and sank a small steamer. The Germans felt that U-100 must have been seen by this last ship, as there was bright moonlight. This ship seems to have been SS Alida Gorthon, 2,373 tons, torpedoed at about 02:25. More ships came into sight, and a 5,000-ton ship was torpedoed, according to prisoners, and sank rapidly by the stern. The account given by the survivors of SS Empire Moose agrees in several particulars with the German version of the sinking of U-100's fifth victim in convoy Obo Able 204, and it seems probable that this is the ship claimed. Empire Moose was hit on the port side about 335 feet from the bow at about 0330. About 10 to 15 minutes later, her bow went up, and she plunged right down by the stern and sank. The escorting ships hunted the U-boat, and prisoners said that star shells were fired and that the convoy scattered. The U-boat escaped, and she needed to replenish her supply of torpedoes. She made for port, arriving at Lorient, where she was received with musical honors about the end of August 1940. On Thursday, 29th August 1940, the German High Command claimed that Kapitänleutnant Schepke had sunk 7 armed enemy merchant ships totaling 43,000 tons, of which 5 had been in convoy. This increased Schepke's claim to 18 ships sunk, with a total tonnage of 61,143 tons, of which 11 ships, amounting to 18,063 tons, had been allegedly sunk when he was in command of smaller U-boats at earlier dates. U-100 was allowed only a short time, 2 weeks or less, in port before setting out on her next cruise. Second cruise. On Wednesday, 11th September 1940, U-11 left Lorient on her second cruise. The earlier days were described as being uneventful until a signal was received from the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats reporting a convoy. Prisoners stated that U-100 attacked this convoy on the night of 20th, 21st, or 21st, 22nd September 1940 and sank 8 ships totaling 61,300 tons within the space of 3 or 4 hours. It was added that no other U-boat took part in this attack. The Germans estimated that the convoy consisted of about 60 ships escorted by 7 destroyers. The ships were described as in columns in close formation, only half a cable apart, an arrangement thought by the Germans to be most considerate. The first lieutenant of U-100 is said to have fired 4 torpedoes in a fan shape, and it was claimed that the first and second torpedoes hit their targets, and after it had been assumed that the third and fourth had missed, the explosion of the third torpedo was heard 4.5 minutes after it had been fired. This had been aimed at what the Germans called the outside column of ships. N.I.D. note. The first ship to be hit in convoy Howe X-ray 72 was SS Canossy in approximate position 55 degrees north and 18 degree 30 west at about 2200 on Saturday 21st September 1940. She was number 52 in the 5th column of the convoy, which consisted of 37 ships in 9 columns, protected by 7 escorts. she was struck on the starboard side and sank by the stern. The second vessel torpedoed seems to have been SS Torninia, second ship of the fourth column. She was struck on the starboard side about 270 foot from the bow. Torninia was not seriously damaged, but was again torpedoed on the port side about 1¼ hours later, and subsequently sank. SS Broom Park, fourth ship in the first column, was torpedoed at about the same time. Other ships torpedoed in this convoy were SS Scholar, the tanker SS Frederick S. Fales, SS Simla, SS Dalkern, SS Blairangus, SS Empire Airman, and the merchant vessel Elm Bank. The survivors of U-100 all stated that their boat was operating alone and had sunk 8 ships. The German High Command announced on Sunday, 22nd September 1940, that Schepke's U-boat had sunk 8 merchant ships of a total tonnage of 61,300 tons. As U-100 had no torpedoes left, she returned to Lorient, arriving there on Wednesday, 25th September 1940. On this date, the German High Command claimed that Schepke had, up to that date, sunk 26 ships, amounting to 122,443 tons. He was awarded the Knight insignia of the Iron Cross, as he had passed the sinkings figure of 100,000 tons. U-100 stayed in port for a little while longer than on previous occasion, probably between 2 and 3 weeks. 3. Third cruise. Prisoners stated that U-100 left Lorient on her third cruise in the middle of October 1940. It was stated that U-100 attacked a convoy in the night of 19th to 20th October 1940, and that U-99 Lieutenant Commander Kretschmer also attacked on this occasion. This statement is incorrect, as on 19th October Kretschmer was some 200 miles away making an attack on convoys Sugar Charlie 7. Survivors of U-100 said that this convoy had been reported to them by the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats, but a German press account stated that it had been reported to U-100 by another U-boat. The crew of U-100 had believed that they had sunk 6 ships, of which 2 or 3 were tankers, but heard on their return to Lorient that one of their victims had been able to reach port. The only ship's name prisoners knew was SS Loch Lomond, 5,452 tons, which was from one of the convoys they had attacked. The following day, they saw 2 empty lifeboats from Loch Lomond. SS Loch Lomond was number 94, the 4th ship in the starboard column of convoy Howe X-ray 79, which consisted of 49 ships in 9 columns protected by 9 escorts and 1 Dutch submarine. From an analysis of the attack on this convoy, it seems most likely that U-100's other 5 victims were SS Matherin, 7,653 tons, SS Bilderjik, 6,856 tons, SS Uganda, 4,966 tons, merchant vessel Caprella, tanker, 8,230 tons, merchant vessel Citala, tanker, 6,218 tons. Matherin, the leading ship of the 8th column, was hit probably on the starboard side at 21:18 on Saturday, 19th October 1940, in approximate position 56° 35 north and 17° 15 west. Bilderjik and number 92 on the convoy was torpedoed on the starboard bow at 21:25 and sank by the head about 40 meters after the explosion. Uganda, the ship astern of Bilderjik, and number 93 on the convoy was hit 5 minutes later at 21:30 on the starboard side. Prisoners said that a tanker which had been torpedoed not claimed by U-100, was seen burning. The Germans stated that they saw an enormous cloud of dust against a sky lit up by the fire, and that when the dust disappeared, the tanker had vanished. In making for her next victims, U-100 was said to have got close to the burning tanker and to have been clearly visible. The Germans attributed their extrication from this danger to the great sangfreude of their captain. The burning tanker referred to was presumably the SS Chirac, which was torpedoed by another U-boat at 22:35 and set on fire, having become separated from the rest of the convoy. U-100's next victims were said to have been two large tankers of about 10,000 tons each. After an interval of 1 3/4 hours, the tanker Caprella, 8,230 tons, and leading ship of the 6th column, was torpedoed at 23:15 amidships on the starboard side and sank. 3 minutes later, the tanker Citala, 6,218 tons, was hit on the starboard side and subsequently sank. Lac Lomond, having seen Mathurin and Uganda torpedoed, picked up some survivors from the former and set off on a course of 110 at 13 knots, escorted by HMS Erebus, to rejoin the convoy which had been lost. At 0300 on Sunday, 20th October 1940, while Erebus was intercepting the tanker Sandanger, Lac Lomond sighted a U-boat on her port quarter. She altered course to the southward and reported the U-boat by wireless telegraph. Erebus closed the position and dropped 2 depth charges without gaining any contact. After an interval, Lac Lomond resumed her course of 110 degrees and increased to full speed. Bit at 0400, again sighted a U-boat, presumably the same one which must thus have been following her. The steamer again altered course to the southward for a short while to bring the U-boat astern, and then resumed her course of 110 degrees. At 0455, she sighted the U-boat for the 3rd time and again altered course to the southward for a slightly longer period. During all this time, Lac Lomond's guns were loaded, and the guns' crews were standing by, but no favorable opportunity of hitting the U-boat occurred. At 0630, in position 56 degrees north and 14 degrees 30 west, after the steamer had again resumed her course of 110 degrees, a vessel was dimly seen astern, and while the British were debating as to whether the vessel was a destroyer or a U-boat, U-100 fired a torpedo which struck Lac Lomond on the starboard side about 100 feet from the stern. The steamer subsequently sank by the stern. U-100 returned to Lorient on or about Thursday, 24th October, 1940. Prisoners said that U-99 and a 750-ton U-boat returned with them. N.I.D. note: this date agrees with the date of U-99's return to Lorient after her 4th cruise, as established from the interrogation of survivors of U-99. On 21st October 1940, the German High Command announced that Schepke had sunk on this cruise up to 21st October 1940 44,565 tons, which was made up of 6 ships, and brought his alleged grand total up to 32 ships, amounting to 167,008 tons of shipping sunk. U-100 remained only a short time in harbor. For 4th cruise. On Thursday, 7th November, 1940, U-100 left Lorient on her 4th cruise. Prisoners said that they attacked several convoys and sank a number of ships, but could not recall any of the names of their victims. They established that they sank 6 ships on this cruise. The first convoy encountered was met accidentally and without any report from Vice Admiral commanding U-boats. N.I.D. note: Convoy Sugar Charlie 11 was attacked during the night of 22nd and 23rd November 1940 at about 150 miles west of Bloody Foreland. SS Bradfin and SS Justitia, SS Salonika, and SS Lys Maersk were torpedoed and sunk. The SS Bruce, though also hit, was able to make port. The SS Bussum in the same convoy was torpedoed at 20:05 on Saturday, 23rd November 1940, in position 55 degrees 39 north and 8 degrees 58 west. And there were no other attacks on convoys at this time. It seems likely that U-100 was responsible for some, if not all, of the above sinkings. U-100 was returning to Lorient when she received orders from the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats to search for an airman who had bailed out of his aircraft in the English Channel but failed to find the airman. While in the Channel, they claimed to have met a 300-ton U-boat. On Tuesday, 26 November 1940, the German High Command announced that Schepke had sunk a further 41,400 tons of shipping. It was established from prisoners that the U-boat returned on or soon after this date to Lorient, but stayed there for only about 1 week. It is believed that Schepke's total claims of shipping sunk then amounted to 38 ships, totaling about 190,000 tons, and that the claims of the German High Command to 41,000 tons sunk in this fourth cruise is greatly exaggerated, the actual figure being about 19,000 tons. This belief is supported by later announcements of the German High Command, which indicated that at the end of this fourth cruise, Schepke's total sinkings amounted to less than 200,000 tons. 5. Fifth cruise. U-100 left Lorient on Monday, 2nd December 1940, for her fifth cruise. Prisoner stated that she had been instructed to send weather reports to the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats. While in the Atlantic, she was said to have sunk 3 ships, all of which were proceeding independently. The last of these was described as a refrigerator ship of about 12,000 tons. The only ship answering this description, and in an area where U-100 could possibly have been and according to prisoners was operating, was SS Orari, a refrigerator ship of 10,350 tons, torpedoed on the evening of Friday, 13th December 1940, in position 49 degrees 50 north and 20 degrees 55 west. She reached port, however, on Monday, 16th December 1940. Later during this cruise, U-100 presumably attacked and is believed to have sunk another ship about 18th or 19th December, because on Friday, 20th December 1940, the German High Command claimed that Schepke had reported the sinking of his 40th ship, and that his personal total of sinkings up to that date amounted to 208,975 tons. He was the third U-boat commander alleged to have sunk over 200,000 tons of shipping, being beaten only by Kretschmer and Prien. On the same day, the Germans announced that Schepke had been awarded the oak leaves to the Knight's insignia of the Iron Cross. Herr Hitler sent him the following telegram: "In grateful appreciation of your heroic deeds in the struggle for the future of our people, I confer upon you, on sinking 200,000 tons of enemy shipping, as 7th officer of the German armed forces, to receive this decoration, the oak leaves to the knight insignia of the Iron Cross." Prisoners stated that U-100 arrived at Brunsbüttel on Saturday, 28th December 1940. Later she proceeded to Kiel. During January and February 1941, she remained in Kiel, where she underwent a refit. Schepke and his crew were feted, photographed, filmed, interviewed, given a winter sports holiday, broadcast, and even serenaded. They were used for propaganda purposes almost without a pause during their stay of 10 weeks in Germany, where they were invariably listened to by enthralled audiences whom they urged to send male youth of their country to sea in U-boats. Section 5. Sixth and last cruise of U-100. U-100 left Kiel on the night of Sunday, 9th March, 1941, and proceeded through the Kiel Canal to Brunsbüttel. A member of the crew had to put ashore there to undergo an immediate operation. In addition, an engine defect caused further delay. This was said to have been a loose stud in one of the diesel main bearings. The U-boat was delayed until the night of Wednesday, 12th March, 1941, when she finally left on her sixth and last cruise. U-100 carried only 12 torpedoes on this occasion, according to prisoners, instead of the usual 14. The reason given was that the bad weather at this time of year made the reloading of the 2 torpedoes carried on the upper deck impracticable. The early part of the cruise was said to be uneventful until orders were received by wireless telegraph to make for a convoy which had been reported by U-99 Lieutenant Commander Kretschmer. U-100 was still in the North Sea when these instructions were received and at once proceeded at full speed to the area indicated. It was stated by some prisoners that the U-boat passed through the Fair Island Channel, but this was not definitely established. On the evening of Sunday, 16th March, 1941, U-100 came up with the convoy. It was established that in addition to U-99 and U-100, 3 or more U-boats were in the vicinity. According to prisoner statements, at about 1900 or 2000, U-100 sighted a destroyer astern. The therefore dived at once and remained submerged for about 1 hour. When she surfaced again, it was dark. They also stated that later the same or another destroyer was sighted and U-100 crash dived. The depth charge attack which followed did not damage the U-boat, which subsequently surfaced astern of the convoy. U-99 had apparently reported that the convoy was escorted by 3 destroyers only, and survivors of U-100 stated that, to their surprise and dismay, they found that the convoy was escorted by an auxiliary cruiser and 8 destroyers. Prisoners stated that the convoy made off accompanied by 5 of the destroyers, leaving 3 to deal with the U-boat. Section 6. Sinking of U-100. For the second time, a depth charge attack was made on U-100. Prisoners said that the first pattern of 4 or 5 depth charges exploded close to the U-boat. The depth gauge was said to have been damaged, and a number of light bulbs were smashed. It was stated that they suffered further depth charging, and that extensive damage was caused in the U-boat. All the pumps were put out of action, the instruments were all smashed, and the supply of compressed air gave out. The captain thought that the British would hear the air escaping. The floor plates were wrenched loose, water entered the bilges, and it was feared that the hydroplanes were no longer functioning properly. The U-boat sank deeper and deeper, as low as 230 meters, 750 feet, according to prisoners. The crew felt very cold and expected the hull to crash at any moment. The duration of these attacks were given as being about 3 hours. It seemed likely that the attacks referred to are Walker's attacks at 0137.5 with 9 depth charges with deep settings, at 0153 with 8 depth charges with medium settings, and Vannock's attack at 0157 with 6 charges set to 350, 250, and 150. Also, Vannock's attack at 032 with charges set as before. After all these attacks, a strong smell of oil was noticed, and after the last attack, a bubbling noise was heard in Vannock's headphones. Although the torpedo tubes were not quite ready for action, the captain had no option other than to surface. He hoped that he would have time and chance to torpedo a destroyer. On surfacing, the Germans saw HMS Vanek at a distance which they estimated at about 500 meters, 540 yards. Vanek, after carrying out depth charge attacks in cooperation with Walker, obtained and radio direction finding contact, and then sighted U-100 bearing green 10, steering from right to left. As the destroyer's speed was considered sufficient to sink the U-boat, the wheel was put over to ram. The diesels of U-100 would not start, and it was found that they were not getting any fuel. Then trouble was experienced with the electric motors. The captain became flurried and gave a wrong order. He ordered astern on the starboard motor, whereas he should have ordered ahead on the starboard motor. He quickly realized his mistake, but there was no longer time to correct it and to turn the U-boat and fire a torpedo, as the destroyer was approaching too fast, and by that time was too close. According to German statements, torpedoes must run 150 meters, 160 yards, before exploding. For a moment, Schepke thought that the destroyer would pass astern of U-100, but quickly saw that this was not likely. He shouted down to the crew to abandon ship. The men put on their life belts and hurried up to the bridge, realizing that it would not be possible to get their 8.8 centimeter gun into action. Some men made as though to man the 20 millimeter gun, but were at once dissuaded by their companions, who felt that they would have no chance against the destroyer, which might then have left them to drown. The time was approximately 03:18. 5 seconds before the collision, Vanek's engines were stopped. The destroyer struck U-100 almost at right angles, just forward of the conning tower. Vanek was brought up all standing. The side of the U-boat's hull and conning tower were smashed in, and the captain was caught and crushed between the stove-in side of the bridge and the periscope. Pfister, the officer under instruction standing behind the captain, said that Schepke was jammed by the destroyer and then dragged under by the sinking U-boat. Pfister was also caught up in the twisted guardrail of the after part of the bridge and dragged under, but managed to free himself and came to the surface. He was picked up by Vanek and was the only officer saved. Immediately after the ramming of U-100, Vanek tried to pick up survivors and managed to rescue 6 men. At this juncture, Walker carried out another attack about 1,000 yards away on a U-boat which proved to be U-99. At 0400, while Vanek was being maneuvered to pick up the remaining survivors, U-99 was sighted at about 1,000 yards. The situation became very awkward and confused. Survivors of U-100 were swimming around Vanek's propellers, and the other U-boat sighted might well have been about to fire torpedoes. Vanek could not shell this U-boat because Walker was beyond U-99 in line of fire. After reporting the U-boat by radio telegraph, Vanek went ahead and turned away to port with the intention of giving Walker a clear field. Unfortunately, Walker also turned to port, and both ships had to stop to avoid collision. Vanek then went ahead, and both destroyers opened fire on U-99 at 0354, but ceased 2 minutes later. At this junction, reliable witnesses and Walker reported sighting a third U-boat astern of her. At 0400, U-99 signaled that she was sinking, and Vanek circled to give Walker protection, while the latter picked up U-99's survivors. Only 1 officer and 5 men of the complement of U-100 could be rescued. It was established that U-100 was to have ended this cruise at Lorient. Section 7. Details of U-100. 1. Device. U-100 had a Black Panther painted on the conning tower. 2. Detector gear. Prisoner said that U-100 was not fitted with detector gear, S. Garrett. 3. Torpedoes. U-100 was stated to have 4 bow tubes and 1 stern tube. She usually carried 14 torpedoes, 2 being housed on deck, except on her last cruise, when the bad weather at the time of year would probably render impracticable the transfer of these torpedoes to the interior of the U-boat. 4. Diving depth. The absolute maximum diving depth to which U-100 was supposed to be allowed to go in special circumstances was stated to be 200 meters, 640 feet. According to prisoners, she sank as low as 230 meters, 750 feet during the attack, after which she was rammed. 5. General remarks. U-100 was described as having a displacement of 517 tons and as being an improvement on U-46, U-48 type. The main differences were that U-100 had Krupp diesel engines instead of MAN diesel engines. The system by which orders were given and received, telephones, loudspeakers, and microphones were all much better. Section 8. Other U-boats. U-3 was laid down in April 1935, launched on 19th July 1935, and completed on 6th August 1935. She was the third U-boat of Germany's modern U-boat fleet to be completed and had a displacement of 250 tons. In 1936, U-3 was commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Lieutenant Meckel. In 1937, by Kapitänleutnant Lieutenant Commander Ernst Gunther Heinecke, and in 1938 by Kapitänleutnant Lieutenant Commander Schepke, who was still in command at the outbreak of war. Schepke carried out 1 war cruise in U-3. During the first month of the war, U-3 went out on an anti-submarine patrol, but achieved no results of importance. According to the German press, except that on one occasion U-3 was forced to remain submerged for 50 hours and the oxygen supply was almost exhausted. On this cruise in U-3, Schepke was said to have intercepted the Danish steamer Wendia, which he shelled and sank, as he considered that the Danish captain was behaving rather too independently. N.I.D. note: the Danish steamer Wendia, 1,150 tons, was torpedoed and sunk off Hansholm, Denmark. Soon after this incident, Schepke was appointed to the command of U-19. Prisoners said that U-3 was used as a training U-boat during the early part of 1940, but was again used during the Norwegian campaign. She was mentioned in captured orders dated 10th March 1940 and 30th March 1940. A chief petty officer of U-100 stated that U-3 had sunk in Kiel Harbor but could give no details. U-19. U-19, one of the older type 250-ton U-boats, was laid down in July 1935 at the Germania Yard, Kiel, and completed on 16th January 1936. She was commanded in 1936 by Kapitänleutnant Lieutenant Commander Viktor Schütz, and in 1937 by Kapitänleutnant Meckel. At the outbreak of war, U-19 belonged to the 1st U-boat flotilla Wendigen. According to prisoners captured earlier in the war, the Vice Admiral commanding U-boats had intended to appoint Oberleutnant zur See Lieutenant Schonder to the command of U-19, but appointed Kapitänleutnant Schepke instead. This seems to have occurred about October or November 1939. From other sources, U-19 was known to have left on a cruise about 14th November 1939. From other sources, U-19 was known to have left on a cruise about 14th November 1939. As this type of U-boat does not remain at sea for more than 2 or at the most 3 weeks, she would probably have returned to Germany about the beginning of December 1939. She seems to have left again on another cruise towards the end of December 1939, as it is known that she returned to Germany on 11th January 1940. German broadcast statements claim that U-19, when commanded by Schepke during the early months of 1940, broke through the British mine belt in order to attack shipping within the area protected by the minefields. Soon after the U-boat reached the vicinity of the English coast, an approaching convoy was sighted at dawn. The U-boat dived and fired a torpedo which hit the leading ship in the convoy. The next ship was said to have passed astern of the U-boat, but then to have altered her course, possibly because she assumed that the first ship had struck a mine. This alteration of course brought the ship into the range of the U-boat, which promptly torpedoed her. The third ship of 800 or 900 tons, which came to the aid of the first two ships, was considered too small to be worth torpedoing. U-19 was then said to have gone closer inshore, in spite of the bright light of a full moon, and the presence of a patrol craft, later on surfacing further away from the coast to recharge her batteries. U-19 found herself confronted by a semicircle of these patrol vessels, which did not spot her, according to the Germans. A convoy with many escorts was then sighted, and U-19 was said to have proceeded on the surface straight for this convoy in the bright moonlight, and to have torpedoed and sunk a ship before the presence of a U-boat was even suspected. The Germans claimed that U-19 then dived and sank another ship by torpedo. This was alleged to have happened only a mile from a British lighthouse. U-19 was not mentioned in captured German orders dated 10th March 1940 relating to the Norwegian campaign, but was included in orders dated 30th March 1940. She left Wilhelmshaven on Monday, 3rd April 1940 for her allotted position to the eastward of the Shetland Islands. On one occasion during the Norwegian undertaking, U-19 was reloading her tubes, and during a short trial, according to the German account, she was forced by British patrol vessels to crash dive. The Germans added that one of the British ships had tried to ram the U-boat, but missed her by about half a meter, and was heard to pass overhead. Depth charges followed, but did not damage U-19 to any serious extent, and she made good her escape gently and quietly. N.I.D. note: it is considered that the above account refers to the attack on a 250-ton U-boat carried out by HMS Zulu at 14:15 on Tuesday, 9th April 1940, in position 59 degrees 58, 45 north, and 0 degrees 26, 0 west. The Germans also said that on another occasion during the Norwegian operations, 4 cruisers passed in front of U-19's tubes, but turned away just as the U-boat was about to fire and thus escaped. U-19 returned to Germany with 5 torpedoes on board on 23 April 1940 and proceeded through the Kiel Canal to Kiel. Schepke was then appointed to command U-100. The German High Command claimed that this officer had up to then sunk 11 ships, totaling 18,063 tons. The captain of U-26, sunk on Monday, 1st July 1940, stated that U-19 had been lost. Since U-26 left Wilhelmshaven on 20th June 1940, the loss of U-19 must have occurred in May, or during the first half of June 1940. Appendix lists 6 survivors: Siegfried Pfister, Corvette Captain, or Commander, age 35, August Blockus, Obersturmmann, or Chief Quartermaster, First Class, age 33, Joseph Kuhn, Bootsmann, Boatswain's Mate, Second Class, age 25, Friedrich Oberl, Maschinenmat, or Mechanic, Second Class, age 25, Kurt Dahlmann, Maschinenoberfrieder, or Stoker, First Class, age 20, Wilhelm Schmidt, Maschinenoberfrieder, or Stoker, First Class, age 24, along with a list of those who did not survive, including Kapitänleutnant Joachim Schepke. Total crew Officers 5, petty officers 15, men 21. Total 41.